Hi, my name's Irrelevant, and this is the Intel Pentium Pro processor. And today, I'm going to be telling you about this thing, and I'm going to be showing you my dream PC build from 1997. Now, indeed, you may have never heard of this thing, because it was one of the shortest lived processors available in the mainstream market. It followed the famous Intel Pentium, one of the processors that changed PC computing as we know it, and no sooner was it released than Intel developed MMX technology, which was a multimedia boosting construction set. I won't get into that, but they wanted to roll that into this processor, and then it became the Pentium 2, which you might have heard of, because that one was commercially successful. Now, one thing that made this guy unique was it was one of the first processors that had its, the L2 cache was built onto the processor. Before this guy, your L2 cache was an extra piece of RAM built onto the motherboard. In some cases, there'd be another slot similar to a DIMM slot that you could slot more cache into it. Now, the advantage of that was it was much faster and lower latency. The disadvantage is, well, you couldn't upgrade it. You were stuck with what you got. This is your typical high-end example right here. That's the Pentium Pro 200 with 512K cache. That would have been the cat's anus back when it came out. You know, I've had computers for a long time. I had Apples and Amigas as a child, but my first real PC was a Pentium 100. That thing had a whole 16 megabytes of RAM, an 850 megabyte hard drive, a second 1 gigabyte hard drive. Oh, yeah, I managed to break the 1 gig mark with my first PC. Had an 8-speed CD-ROM and another 4-speed CD-ROM. That thing was actually purchased used and still cost about $1,200. Bonus, it came with a couple games like Duke Nukem 3D and Command & Conquer. Now, at some point, and I don't remember why, I don't think it was my fault, but the motherboard died. So PCs being as modular as they are, we were happy to find out when we brought it to a local shop for repair that they'd be able to fix it by just replacing the motherboard or even upgrade it and be able to keep all the same hardware, just had to swap out the motherboard and processor. I managed to talk my mom into an upgrade, and of course, I wanted the Pentium Pro. Actually, I didn't just want the Pentium Pro, I wanted 2 Pentium Pros. I wanted a dual Pentium Pro on one of those Asus boards they had with the riser card that you slap the freaking 2 processors onto. Now, of course, I didn't get the dual Pentium Pro because it would have cost something stupid like $3,000 to $4,000 just for the motherboard and processor set. But what I did end up with was this. Actually, one of my first Asus boards. I don't think I've owned anything but Asus on my maiden rig since. What is this? The P/I P6NP5. Yeah, that's a nice, easy to remember name. This is an AT board. Remember those bad boys? That was your keyboard connector. But this is, you know, an early board that started coming with PS2 mouse connectors, and it even had USB, even though it was completely useless at the time because there were pretty much no USB devices at the time. To the best of my knowledge, this thing still works. But I don't know. I might have overloaded it because the power supply pins are kind of burnt up. I don't know that I even have a working power supply for this board, and if I do, it's so old I wouldn't want to trust it. And with this board, I got the Pentium Pro 150 with 256 meg cache, about the best we could reasonably afford. And even that, this thing was probably pretty expensive at the time. So here I am, this kid, excited. I just got the hot new processor in my computer, and boy, I might have been a bit disappointed. Why? Because my computer still only had 16 megs of RAM. Back in those days, you couldn't afford to spec out your computer to actually make use of a processor. I was barely scraping the surface of what the Pentium I had was capable of, let alone a Pentium Pro. There was one point when I got a scanner, I tried to scan an 8x10 into it in a high quality resolution. It came up to a 30-something megabyte file. Now, do you know what happens when you try to load up a 30 megabyte file on a computer with 16 megabytes of RAM? It takes about 10 or 20 minutes to render. before it pops up on the screen and you can actually see it. And then the second you try to zoom in or zoom out or scroll around, yeah, about another 10 or 20 minutes of hard drive thrashing later. When you didn't have enough RAM, it had to use your hard drive as RAM. Now this guy has since been somewhat upgraded. I'm pretty sure under the hood here is another one of these 200s with 512 just to max it out. And, you know, later in life used, well after I stopped using this machine, I think I had an Athlon 500 at the time, well, that's 128 megabytes of RAM. This is what I would have needed to get the most out of this processor back then. But unfortunately, that ship had sailed. It was mostly a curiosity by the time I got these parts for it. That said, I did finally, 10 years too late almost, had the ability to build my dream computer that I would have wanted if I could have picked one out, money is no object, back in about 96, 97. And here it is. And yeah, it's not much to look at. This is what an enthusiast case looked like in the 90s. It was just a big honkin' beige box that you could cram a lot of hardware into. Because pretty much if you were an enthusiast, well, the motherboards were all the same size, but you wanted to put more in here. Especially if, like me, you're one of the first kids in the block to get a CD burner. This is actually the original 8-speed CD-ROM that came with my Pentium 100. To the best of my knowledge, it still works. Let's crack this pupper open and see what we got here. Oh, you gotta take the top off first. Oh, sexy. Wow. Wow. Look at that. Would you just look at it? Now, I have it rigged with one fan, but there are two processors underneath there. Now, this isn't the Asus board that I was talking about that I originally wanted. This is actually a more common workstation board made by Intel, back when Intel still made motherboards. I do not know where to find the part number on this thing. Maybe it'll turn up after as I explore this thing. It has some sort of extra, looks like a voltage regulator here. Not exactly sure why. It might have something to do with running two processors. Maybe you don't need it if you're only running one. And then there, if I recall correctly, that's 512 megabytes of RAM. This thing's maxed out. What do we have down here? MGA, Matrox. This is an old Matrox video card. This would have been on the high end there if you wanted to do stuff like photo editing. This was pre 3D acceleration. This would have had no gaming capability. And I know nothing about this thing other than it has some sort of video memory upgrade. Copyright 1996. Notice the lack of PCI Express or even AGP. It wasn't around then. Everything went on to the same PCI bus. Now there's a lot of gibberish that might have gone on up in here that's been generally omitted because, well, it's useless now. But hey, let's look at what is there. Oh, look at that. You remember zip drives? I remember zip drives. I never had one when they were relevant. Again, that was purchased used after the fact for the mere curiosity of it. It's an internal Scuzzy version. And this was my boot drive for many years. That is a Hewlett-Packard 1 gigabyte internal Scuzzy drive. That was one of about 3 or 4 hard drives that I was running back in the day. Before this, back in my Pentium 100, Pentium Pro 150 days, I booted off the 1 gig. I had a 300 something that was dedicated virtual memory. I had a 5 gig Western Digital normal IDE drive that was I had storage and ran games off of it and whatnot. It was a modern drive. And then I also had this one other beast. You see, when you're speccing out a dream system in the 90s, you want the biggest and fastest hard drive that they make. At the time, it was a Seagate 9 gigabyte. They actually had gigabytes that big back then. Now, that I never managed to get used, but I got something similar. Would you look at that beast? That is a computer hard drive, a 4 gigabyte from 1993. Again, purchased used after the fact for mere curiosity's sake, but I did get it at a time when 4 gigabytes was still a relevant amount of space. And I did have it installed onto my computer at the time. Again, not this build, but look at that. 5 1/4 full height. This is a modern internal hard drive for scale. And that's a modern SATA SSD. Well, that's actually an SSD adapter, but still. Now, because I built this thing so much later, it didn't end up getting crazy Scuzzy hard drives and stuff like that. I did install them for apes and Artians, but I never actually practically used them because other things were available. To give you perspective, by the time I built this system, I had spare in scrap 40 gigabyte hard drives. They weren't that relevant anymore when I built this system. And that right there is a Maxter 40 gig ATA 133 hard drive. Now, this wouldn't have supported ATA 133. It would have maybe done ATA 33, but that's the reason why I use this Promise TX2 Plus SATA and ATA 150 interface. And that pretty much maxed out this computer's hard drive capabilities. Now, this thing's spec'd out right now to use this guy. It won't fire up unless I install it. And it wasn't installed because when I didn't really use this system, I kind of needed this for other things. Hoy hoy, that's a tight fit. Remember the early days of the enthusiast computers when they had like these sleeved hard drives? Now, before I get firing on this thing, I would love to show you the processors that it has. Look at that. You've heard of a Black Edition processor? This is the Pentium Pro 200 with 1 meg of cache. 1 meg. That was unheard of in a mainstream, even enthusiast system. This is server workstation grade stuff right here. You wouldn't have even been able to think about buying one of these unless you were running some sort of business that was making good money with computers. This probably would have been in some sort of web server at the time. I'm not gonna take the TIM off of it because I think it's still good enough that I can just slop her back up there. These things weren't particularly high wattage at the time, so keeping them cool was a heck of a lot easier. I didn't even know these existed until I saw them pop up used on eBay. And then I thought they were sexy as hell, so I had to have them. Even the back is different. It's on a printed circuit board instead of a ceramic dealie. Some mounting solutions were rather rough. Here, the screw pretty much just threads in between the heatsink blades and you call it good. So let's try to turn this thing on, shall we? Let's see what happens. Now, I'm pretty sure this thing's not gonna support a USB motherboard or a USB keyboard and mouse. Fortunately, I do have some PS2s in inventory, and unlike modern systems, you can't really hot plug them. If they're not plugged in when you turn the system on, they might not work at all. Funny thing is, my PS2 keyboard I have to work with is, it's in French. All right, we got power, we have keyboard mouse, we have VGA. Remember VGA? Sure, it's not that old. All right, you ready for this? I got a stopwatch here. Can you hear that? Those are some classic PC sounds. Oh, look at it go. Look at it slowly count up the RAM. That's amusing in and of itself. This system's taking longer to validate the RAM than it takes a modern system to get into Windows. Keyboard detected, mouse detected. Well, that's good. That's progress. Oh, seen here, it has to initialize the separate hard drive controller. Not uncommon back then if you had a higher end system with a separate hard drive controller. That in and of itself also takes longer to do than the booting of a modern system. CMOS checksum invalid. Oh, okay. So this is kind of sideswiping our timing here. This thing's been turned off for so long, its CMOS settings are probably cleared at the time. Oh yeah, look at that. January 1st, 1990. We probably have to set that correct or else things might not work at all. Whoa, how does this work here? Numlock? Okay, there we go. Let's see. Is it affected by the Y2K bug? No, it'll do 2020. Floppy, there's no floppy. Secondary master, creative. Oh, okay, that's the CD drive. I didn't recognize that. Pentium Pro, 2 meg, 1 meg cache, so it supports all this. Auto. Man, this is all... There once was upon a time I might have recognized all this, but plug and play, use plug and play OS. Windows 95 might be okay, it might work with... I'm pretty sure it's Windows NT 4 on here. Okay, well, exit save changes. I'm gonna reset the timer because I think it's pretty much booting from scratch now. Okay, we gotta count up the RAM again. At the very least, you need to set the date correctly, not necessarily the time, and you make sure that plug and play is enabled. That's a feature that was in BIOS back in the day so that the motherboard knew that the operating system had the ability to manage the hardware. Before then, you had to literally manage hardware manually by going all through the BIOS and assigning address IRQs and whatnot so things didn't conflict. Nowadays, that's all automatic. Just occurred to me, I forgot to plug the CPU fan back in. Oh, yeah, those puppers are getting toasty. But not that toasty. I think they could go for a while like that. Oh, now it sounds more familiar. We're over a minute now and we aren't even past post yet. Oh, now Windows is starting. Windows 2000, that's what I have installed on here. Because it was good enough to run some of what I wanted to do with this system, but at the same time, old enough that this system would support it. I don't know if you can hear that hard drive grinding, but that hard drive is grinding. I almost wish I had to put a mic on this system so you can hear what this sounds like right now. Let's get the lab in there. We're at 2 minutes and 41 seconds, and it looks like we can start doing stuff, but the hard drive's still grinding, so it doesn't count yet. Oh no, I thought it was done. The screen cam kicked off, so we might have missed a bit of that. Okay, so we got this guy right here. Windows 2000 has finished installing new devices. You must restart your computer before the new settings will take effect. Restart now? Oh, I guess we're booting all over again. Sure, after 3 minutes and about 20 seconds, let's click restart and get another lap in. While this is booting, let's look at one of my Amazeballs cooling mod. Cutting out the grills in the front and even the fan back to get more air cooling through the power supply. Again, it took something like 1 minute and 30 seconds just to clear the post. And that was probably considered fast back then. Well, actually no, because it has to manually count the RAM. If you had a good system with hard drive controllers, I guess it took longer to post than a lesser system. But then the lesser system would take way longer to actually load Windows. 2 minutes, and we have the screen. Hard drive still grinding, so it doesn't count. I think the hard drive just stopped. Or no, a little bit more. 2 minutes and 50 seconds. We'll call it roughly 3 minutes to get this computer to start up, which quite honestly, I was expecting way longer than that. It just goes to show that this system's actually kind of spec'd out. 512 megs of RAM was pretty good for Windows 2000, especially with a dual processor. Now this guy is a veritable time capsule. Remember Netscape? Corel, Photo Paint, or Corel Draw 7? Kazaa, that's before LimeWire. In fact, I'm surprised I don't have a BitTorrent on here. Back when I still used File Manager, a lot of you probably do not remember that. Exeme, I don't even remember what that is. I think that was another file sharing program. What I used this computer for when I initially built it was, I called it the subserver. So basically, this is the computer that I would leave on overnight to download stuff that I wanted to download. I don't remember how long it did that role for, but yeah, it wasn't particularly power efficient for that, but then I didn't really want to burn down my good computers doing it. There was a point in time later on when I ended up building a low wattage media box for streaming, or not streaming, watching downloaded movies on my TV when you could start doing stuff like that with a computer. They actually had video outputs that could plug into a standard TV. That was unheard of at one point. And then that would become the computer I would leave on all night to do my downloading, and I stopped using this one for it. And then it just basically added to my collection. Let's see what we might find in here. My documents, there's nothing in here. My pictures, just sample stuff. Okay, so File Manager. Oh, I barely even remember how to use this. Torrents. Oh, let's see what I was downloading back then. Office space. Sure. Let's see here. I can't right click and bring up a properties tab on this. That's wonderful. How would I have done this back then? View, I don't remember how to use File Manager. That's interesting. Actually, if I change view to all file details, boom, 2005, 15 years ago. That's when I last used this computer to do something. And that's about when I built it. Almost 10 years after this technology came out. Evil Dead with extras. Monty Python. I was a fan of that show. Kids in the Hall. Another Army of Darkness bootleg edition. I guess that's what I managed to download on here. Outgoing. Oh boy. This is all sorts of interesting stuff. I don't even... Oh wow. That was my girlfriend back then. That was my ride back then. That's a picture of Drum Guy that you've seen show up in my other videos. We go back that far. Wow. Wow. This is just a time capsule. Big drive enabler. You needed a special driver if you wanted to use a hard drive bigger than something like, I don't remember. Actually, it might have been when hard drives hit hundreds of gigs. This is interesting. This system's 15 years old, but it still boots up and works perfectly. Oh yeah, remember this? No, you probably don't remember this. Computers, the operating system couldn't control the power on the motherboard. So when you did shutdown, you got this prompt, and then it was safe to press the button. The button of which would always abruptly turn off your computer. Back then, you couldn't use your power button to turn the computer off using the proper shutdown method. And in some rarer cases, back in those days, if you did abruptly shut off your computer, you could totally crash your hard drive or screw up some sort of program that was running at the time. This was an era when issues of crashing and corruption were more prevalent on a PC because of certain safeguards that didn't exist yet. Now, fortunately, because this setup is so lightweight as it stands right now, it's relatively snappy to use. Does Task Manager exist? Oh, yes, it does. And look at that. That would have been great once upon a time. We're using 66 megabytes of RAM out of 512. And we have 2 logical processors. And idle? Well, it's only 1%, isn't it? Now what happens if I stick this off in the corner to see what happens as we continue this comedy? Now the question is, will this thing run something resembling modern internet? That's gonna be quite the wild card. Even though this motherboard has USB, I don't think it's working. Either I don't have drivers for it, or I couldn't find drivers for it, or it just doesn't like being. Yeah, if I go into Device Manager, we got a no-go on the USB controller. Now this computer does have a built-in network controller, and I recall it worked fine. The network prompt went away. Is there a way to check here? Networks and dial-up connections, local area connection, 100 megabits, connected, sent, received. Okay, it says we're on the network here. Is there a way to access the network? Oh wow, this is ancient. Computers near me. Hey, my NAS box is in here. Well, what do you know? Really? Okay, networking is working. I'm totally connected automatically to my NAS box, or instantly to my NAS box. I was able to load a picture file that's on the NAS box, so the network's up. Hey, that's great. Progress. Now, here is where it is going to really get funny. As you can see, I have no screen capture for this, but if I go and try to run Netscape 7.1, what is going to happen? I think I double-clicked it. Okay, that is anticlimactic. Netscape is not working. I don't see it on the list here. Wow, that's the smallest process list I've seen in 15 years. What about this link? What about Internet Explorer? We will resort to that. You're about to view pages over a secure connection. Okay, Torrent Spy. All right, google.ca. All right, we've got Google on an old Internet Explorer. Okay, now what happens if I Google YouTube? There it is. Look at this. It totally looks like the 90s again. This is mental. This is mental. YouTube page cannot be displayed. I saw this coming. Even though Google's relatively simple, a website like YouTube is going to have scripting that this old browser doesn't even stand a chance in running. I can't even get Firefox. It's just not there. And it loads up a Bing. Okay, we are running in circles. Okay, Google seemed to work. Now let's Google Firefox and see if we can find a download link. Download Firefox. No go. Does Wikipedia work? No go. Now, for the record, another component in the ultimate dream computer build of this era would have been a screen much like this. This is another vintage piece I managed to hold on to, and it still works, but it's really faded now. It looks like hell, but whatever. I use it as a second monitor here. Now let's see if we can hop on the old FF party here and see if we can find a version that might work. I'm looking for a version compatible with, well, I guess if we use an XP version, maybe it'll work. I can't believe there's an advertisement on the Firefox website for Microsoft Edge. That's hacks. No way this is gonna work. No way. So I can access all my files across all my computers. Certain key folders like my downloads folder, certain personal and user folders, they're all on the NAS. Even my desktop is on the NAS. That way I can just have the same desktop across all my computers. There it is. Firefox installer. Windows 7 or newer is required. Yay! 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 Yeah. We're not done yet. Apparently, there is a browser that will still work on Windows 2000, and that's Opera 12. I guess it's going to be a 32-bit download. That's probably why. The newer one's probably 64-bit, and this isn't even going to touch 64. Opera 12.02. Olderversion.com is coming up here. I need to get screen capture working on my computer one of these days. Okay, that's downloading now at a snail's pace on this random freeware website. All right, Opera 12.02. Extracting. It's stuck at 17%. Oh no, there it goes. Okay, I think the computer's thinking now. Is that processor grinding? No, yeah, 40% system resources. Oh, look at this. Accept and install. Maybe I should have checked advanced to see if it's gonna add extra crap. Are we done? It's loading up. It's using 50% resources to load up. Okay, let's pop in a Google here. Let's see how that looks. It still looks like it's quite possibly from the 90s. Let's try a YouTube. Oh boy, something's happening. Oh boy, I think the computer's having a hard time here. Like, we got our 2 threads giving her there. Like, it's thinking, it's working. I should have the timer going here. Update error. It's still going though. It's still doing something. Let me oh, this is actually interesting right here. Even though the system's loaded down trying to do this, because it's a dual core processor, it's still multitasking reasonably well. So I can load up my network status and see that it is not doing anything. It looks like it appeared to load some mobile version of YouTube. Oh boy, wow. What happens if I try to load up Facebook? Oh boy, something happens. I'm trying to type, but it's, oh wow, there is so much lag time on the computer right now, on the keyboard. I can't believe it's trying to load Facebook right now. It's September 2020 right now, and around the beginning of the month, Facebook did some sort of update, and it's become a lot heavier now.
to the point where even a modern system does not run it efficiently. Oh my God. What did I tell you? I can't even scroll right now. Like, I am scrolling and it is just ground. It's grinding. How's my local area? Like, it's slowly receiving data, but it can't even. It can't even. I'm scrolling and nothing's happening. Now, the interesting thing about this is it might not necessarily be the fault of the processors. The processors are running at 50-ish%. In theory, they might not be maxed out. What could very well be going on here is the video hardware. Even if the processors could do this, that old video card doesn't have a chance. It just doesn't. I am not sure as of when, but right now you need a video card of at least 512 megabytes of video memory in order to process modern internet. You ideally want one more around the 1 gigabyte range if, say, you have a nicer monitor, or in my case, dual monitors. Right now, that video card is probably screaming. If I could see a telemetry monitor like in Windows 10 for that GPU right now, it's probably just screaming, trying to render all the visuals that are trying to get loaded up here. The ads alone are gonna max out its meager kilobytes of RAM that it has to work with. Maybe it has a megabyte or two at most. Because I'm trying to scroll here and it's absolutely not happening. I could try throwing a better video card in here. If I dig around my archives, I might find a PCI video card that is a... Oh! It just did something! I might... Well, guys, this has been... It just jumped again. Wow. It looks like it takes like 1 or 2 minutes to go through run scroll now that it's kind of settled into the web page. And of course, the processors are pinned at 50%. Now, my multitasking looks like it's still going to be good. If I clip around other windows, they still go, but oh, yeah, this is how we know it's a video issue. When I close those windows that were overtaking the web browser, yeah, you see that? That's how long it took it to refresh. My dialogue keeps getting disturbed by this. Clearly, this system does not have enough horsepower to run Facebook. In fact, I almost feel like that should be a meme now. You know the old saying, can it run Crisis? Oh, let's boot up an old vintage system. Can it run Facebook? Oh, wow. So looking in my archives, or at least a quick look in my archives, I found what is probably the best PCI video card that I have. This right here is an NVIDIA GeForce MX 440 with 64 megabytes of RAM. Now, this would have some margin of hardware acceleration on it, and this would be compatible with Windows 2000. Now, I could try to slap her in there. Maybe it will fare better, but I doubt it. Okay, so yeah, I seem to have found drivers for it on the NVIDIA website for Windows 2000. What's next? All right, we're back online. I do believe these video drivers are installed because the system does look better than it did before. If I go into settings, I can get 32-bit color. I can get the native resolution of this monitor. I might even be able to get the proper refresh rate. Yeah, 75 Hertz. Oh, this looks great. Well, as great as Windows 2000 can look. So now what happens when we try to launch the internet? It's possible that if we spar with this thing long enough, we could get proper codecs and whatnot. That used to be a thing. When you set up a new computer, you had to install all these other little software drivers, not even hardware drivers, but software drivers like codecs, like Flash and plugins and stuff like that, before you could think of running modern internet. Typing is still lagging. It's taken a lot of time to get those first few keystrokes out of the deal. Well, it's scrolling a little bit faster. Just to say, I think the video card has accelerated it a bit, but it's still... Now, if you are the computer geek who has stuck around this far, I know what you're thinking. Dude, that old hard drive. What about that crazy old hard drive? You gotta show us working, man. You gotta. Well, sure, why not? It should be easy enough because this computer has built-on Scuzzy interface. I should just be able to schlup that in there without any modifications or changes whatsoever. Just had to go dig up an old cable. Now, back in the day, the only thing you had to do was set the ID on the drive. But with only one drive in place, that's not really a problem. There is the matter of termination on the last drive on the chain, but I can't remember if that was much of a problem. All right, it's plugged in. Are you ready for this? You can't see it, but there's not much to see. Here, let's turn it around facing the camera, and hopefully that camera microphone picks up the hilarity. Do you hear that spinning up? I think it reached terminal velocity. The vibrations alone of this thing are mental. And you can feel it, you can hear it resonating the whole desk. And there it is, showing up as drive D. My mouse is vibrating. So my computer and local disk D, and that is working relatively quickly, and it is accessing files that I seem to have stored on here, which are memes from the era that I last fired this thing up at. I do believe I made this a bit of a time capsule in ways. I'm probably putting in some favorite music of the time, and there's all sorts of random crap on here. That's about 2007. Yeah, there's a folder here that says March 2007. Last time it was updated. The old memes. Oh, the old memes. Oh, picture I drew. The old memes. The old me. Well, other than the fact that it is obnoxiously loud, it still seems to click relatively slowly, and, well, you know, oh, that's a program. Truck dismount. Is that gonna run on this computer? That was like a meme video game or something at the time. Oh, wow. Okay. What is this even? Like, oh, there's two guys now, and he's on top, and then we go. Brrr. Oh boy, would you look at that? Giver. Well, guys, at least we got this computer to do something interesting. Wow. That was worth getting this hard drive online. Further building upon the theme of things obnoxious, would you listen to this guy? Would you just listen to that scream? I hooked up the 1 gigabyte drive that's on top to, you know, value add. Now this is a drive that I legitimately have not booted up in a very long time. And in fact, it might have, oh, look at that, a bootable version of Windows NT 4? Huh, I wonder. I've gone ahead and disconnected the normal hard drive, so let's see if we can boot off of that Scuzzy hard drive and see what's on it. Oh, damn, that's loud. Well, would you look at that? Yeah, it looks like it booted automatically. There is some version of Windows NT 4 on that drive. That's a blue screen. That's not a blue screen. That's what it looked like when you were booting NT 4 back in the day. It only detects one system processor. Maybe it didn't support multi-threading. That was a thing once upon a time. Not all operating systems supported multiple processors. Windows 95 didn't. I don't think Windows 98 did. I would believe that NT4 was one of the ones that did because it was a workstation. NT4 is a historical operating system because it is the basis by which all Windows we know today are built off of. Windows 2000 was a newer version of Windows NT4. The system that 95 and 98 use is completely different from the NT system. And if you look in the deep hardware, software files of even Windows 10 today, it's going to make references to NT. At least one driver failed, probably the video driver. It actually had a login. Yeah, I don't think there was a way out of the login on this operating system. I'm surprised I remembered my password. Oh boy. Yeah. Does the network work? Look at that great blacked out color scheme. Yeah, it doesn't look like NT4 can get onto my network. So there's pretty much nothing. Back in these days, I probably would have kept my user files on a separate hard drive because 1 gigabyte didn't get you very far. That said, we're not going to find anything on here. But hey, we just booted NT4. And as an extra added bonus, one last hurrah while I have this system running, since I saw the drivers were there, this monitor right here, it's a faded mess. The brightness and contrast on it are cranked, but it is so old and worn out, you can barely see it, especially with the blacked out color scheme that I have going on here. Now, of all the crappy monitors I might have had kicking around that I inevitably got rid of, this is the one that I kept because there's something special about this monitor. Do you see that? It's an early touchscreen. If you look closely, you can see blocks burned into the screen. This used to be at some kiosk in some government office maybe once upon a time, and then it found its way into a junk pile at one of the schools, because that's what they did with old computers at one point, donated them to the school so the students can tinker with them, and then it ended up in my personal collection. And I vaguely recall drivers being available for Windows 2000, and I think it might have worked on that install of Windows 2000, but since I saw the drivers pop up in NT, I figured I might as well give it a try. It's quite awkward, not particularly accurate. I'm not sure if I can, oh yeah, you can grab. I'm not sure if there's a way to right click. Not that you needed to, but it does work. It's a COM device, serial port device, an old school serial port device, not a breakfast serial port device, not a universal serial bus device, and not even a serial ATA device. I'm babbling now, but there you have it. A little visit through the time machine back to 1995. My dream computer system that I would have wanted in about 96, 97, here it is sitting in front of me. And this loud, obnoxious abomination of a machine, had it been spec'd out the way I might have wanted it to be with the 9 gigabyte Scuzzy hard drive, the full height over there that rattles the table, all the RAM that it has, those 2 processors I'm not even sure were available until later on. This machine, as it sits, probably would have cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 to $10,000 to purchase. And in the mid-2000s, I probably sourced it out on eBay for a couple $100, and now it's so friggin' useless. All I can do is crash some virtual car. Obviously, there's older games and stuff I could probably get to work on this, setting up kind of like a DOS box retro vintage gaming rig, and it would probably serve that purpose very well, but I'm not much of a retro gamer, so it's gonna go back into the archives, and maybe, just maybe, it'll be worth a lot of money to someone someday. Who knows? This system as it sits right now might be worth more than I paid for it. That seems to be a bit of a trend. But the funny thing is, it still seems to be perfectly functional. Because as the saying goes, they don't build things like they used to. And this thing is probably going to outlive most modern computers as it stands right now. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you stay tuned, I plan on doing a little bit more retro computer videos for the lols and the apes and archons, as I like to say.